Right now, somewhere in the world, it's raining. And if you're inside, there's a decent chance you like it. The sound of rain when you're sheltered from it is one of the most reliably pleasant sounds a human can experience. There's actually a word for that feeling: chrysalism, the tranquility of being inside during a storm. You don't need to do anything about the rain. The roof holds, the walls hold, the heat is on. You might genuinely be happier because of it. It gives you permission to stay in and do nothing. Now, strip all of that away. The shelter you're in, you built it during the dry season, when you couldn't be certain how much water it would need to handle. It has been raining for 5 days. The ground inside is wet. The fire is struggling. The food you stored is starting to rot. And you have no idea when it will stop. There has never been a forecast. There will never be a forecast. Rain today is a playlist. Rain for 300,000 years was one of the most complex survival problems ancient humans faced. And almost none of the solutions left any trace. Because the things that kept them alive were made of wood and hide and leaf. And wood and hide and leaf rot. So what did they actually do? First, you need to understand what kind of threat rain actually is, because it's not the threat most people think. A blizzard attacks you. Rain doesn't attack you. Rain dismantles you. The human body loses heat roughly 25 times faster in water than in air. You can develop fatal hypothermia at 10 degrees Celsius, a temperature that feels merely cool on a dry day, if you are wet and cannot dry off. An ice age blizzard kills you in hours if you're unprotected. Endless rain kills you in days, sometimes weeks. Slowly, quietly, without any single dramatic moment. Just a body whose core temperature is always slightly wrong and never gets the chance to recover. And alongside that slow physical threat, every other survival system is failing at the same time. Fire, the single most critical technology, is catastrophically threatened by sustained rain. Wet wood won't burn. Wet ground wicks heat away from any fire base. Restarting a fire from friction in wet conditions is exponentially harder than maintaining one. Hunting collapses. Many prey animals shelter and reduce movement in heavy rain. Tracking becomes nearly impossible. The physical cost of hunting in wet clothing can exceed the caloric value of whatever you catch. And the food you stored is rotting faster than you can eat it. Studies of traditional hunter-gatherer populations during wet seasons document something consistent across cultures. Foraging efficiency drops dramatically. Groups rely on stored resources. Activity levels fall to minimum. People wait. On paper, a species with no waterproof materials, no reliable fuel storage, and no forecast should not have survived weeks of continuous rain repeatedly across millennia. But the archaeological record of equatorial and subtropical ancient sites shows continuous habitation across seasons that included repeated wet periods. They figured something out. Several somethings. And the most important ones were the things that leave no trace. The engineering challenge of a waterproof shelter sounds simple. It is not. A flat roof collects water. A steep roof sheds it. An angled roof with a deep overhang keeps rain from driving in sideways. A roof elevated slightly above the walls creates airflow that speeds drying inside. These are principles modern architects learn from textbooks. Ancient humans discovered them empirically, one wet season at a time. By noticing which shelters stayed dry and which didn't. By remembering. By building differently the next time. Archaeological evidence of deliberately angled post structures consistent with pitched roofing appears at Terra Amata in Nice, France, around 380,000 years ago. Nobody called it engineering. Nobody called it architecture. Somewhere in ancient Africa, a group returns to a camping site they used the previous wet season. The overhang that sheltered them last year let in driving rain on one side. This time, they extend it. Branches and leaves angled deliberately to shed water rather than collect it. The knowledge travels forward. The next group to use that site finds a better structure waiting. Empirical architecture. Accumulated one wet season at a time. They didn't invent roofing. They noticed which shapes stayed dry and remembered. Water flows downhill. Water pools on the ground. The second survival discovery of the wet season was vertical. Get above it. Everything important. Off the ground. Elevated sleeping platforms appear across ancient shelter evidence.
In every wet climate region studied, raised fire hearths, slightly above ground level, appear at tropical archaeological sites across multiple continents. Elevated food caches hung rather than stored on the ground, not because anyone theorized it, because someone's fire went out, because someone's stored food rotted, because someone's sleeping hides absorbed moisture from below and the group woke up colder than they fell asleep. Day 6 of continuous rain. The ground inside the shelter is not flooded, but it is wet. Everything sitting on it is damp. The fire is built on a raised platform of flat stones. Stones they carried specifically for this, because someone remembered what happened when the fire was on the wet ground. The sleeping hides are elevated on a frame of sticks. The food is hanging, not from clever engineering, from memory of the last time they got it wrong. The oldest solution to water was vertical. Get above it. Everything important off the ground. Here is the hardest survival problem of the wet season. Not the cold, not the hunger. The fire. Maintaining a fire in sustained heavy rain is one of the most difficult tasks in all of primitive survival. Wet wood won't ignite. Wet ground pulls heat away from any fire base. Wet air makes the fire work harder for every degree of warmth it produces. And if the fire goes out, restarting it in wet conditions is exponentially harder than keeping it alive. So ancient humans developed a different strategy. Not a fire, an ember. The ember bank. Instead of maintaining a large fire, groups in wet conditions kept the smallest possible glowing coal, protected from moisture by a covering of ash. Ash is hydrophobic. It sheds water. A coal buried in ash can stay alive for days on almost no fuel. Sometimes inside a clay vessel, sometimes inside a folded bark carrier, sometimes simply banked under a shelter of wet bark. It has been raining for 8 days. The fire is the size of a fist, smaller than a campfire, smaller than a cooking fire, just enough ember to restart everything the moment conditions allow. They are burning the driest wood they stored before the rain, bark, resin-rich wood, deadfall they collected during dry weather. The ember is covered in ash when nobody is tending it. The ash is the reason the group doesn't have to start over. The knowledge of how to keep an ember alive across a wet season is as important as the knowledge of how to start a fire, maybe more. They didn't need to keep a fire. They needed to keep one coal, and that coal was worth more than anything else in the camp. Day 11 of rain. The group cannot hunt, cannot forage efficiently. The shelter is holding. The ember is alive. There is nothing to do. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades studying the Jew/Hawanzi people of the Kalahari. Her research found that during confinement periods, storytelling, song, and social bonding intensified dramatically. The camp that was quiet and efficient during good weather became a space of narrative during enforced stillness. Stories about animals, stories about other groups, histories, explanations, myths. And in the archaeological record, something else appears consistently at sites of prolonged human shelter: art. Blombos Cave in South Africa, one of the most important early human sites ever excavated, contains some of the oldest evidence of symbolic human behavior. Ochre processing kits dated to around 100,000 years ago. Abstract engravings around 75,000 years ago. Shell beads, deliberate, repeated symbolic making, all from a cave in a region with significant seasonal rain. The hypothesis is not that rain caused art. The hypothesis is that enforced confinement gave a species that never stopped moving the one resource it never otherwise had: time. And what humans do with enforced stillness is the same thing they have always done. They start making things. Someone, bored, confined, with time they had never had, picked up a piece of ochre and drew something on a flat stone. Nobody was watching. Nobody asked. There was simply nothing else to do. That action, accumulated across 10,000 wet seasons, eventually became art. The rain didn't just force them to survive, it forced them to stop. And stopping, for a species that never stopped, turned out to be the condition that changed them. Here's the thing about that feeling you have right now: chrysalism, the specific pleasure of being inside during a storm. The word was coined in 2013 by a writer named John Koenig in a book called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. It's a new word for a feeling that had no name in any major language, but the feeling itself is not new. The specific pleasure of shelter during rain, the warmth, the sound, the sense of safety while chaos is just outside, is, according to evolutionary psychologists, one of the clearest examples of an evolved emotional reward. Not an aesthetic preference, not a personality trait, a neurological signal. The pleasure is the reward. The reward evolved because ancient humans who felt it were more motivated to build good shelter, to maintain it, to return to it. The positive feeling is the reinforcement loop that made shelter building worth the effort before there were words like worth or effort. You are not enjoying the sound of rain. You are experiencing the neurological reward your ancestors received for successfully surviving it. The feeling is the memory. And you feel it even when there was never any danger, because the reward system evolved before safety was guaranteed, and it never got the update that said, the roof will hold. You're back where this started. Rain on the window, warm inside, that feeling. But now you know what the feeling is made of. It is made of 300,000 years of people who built shelters and felt this exact sensation when the shelter held. People who kept one coal alive for 8 days and felt it when the fire came back. People who spent 12 days trapped in gray and damp and made something, just to have made something. The roof above you is not the same roof they had, but the reward your brain gives you for being under it is the same reward. You didn't learn to love the sound of rain from inside. You inherited it from everyone who survived the rain before you and felt their bodies say, good, you made it. This was the right thing to do. They survived weeks of endless rain with no forecast, no guarantee, and no way to know when it would stop. And somewhere in that gray, trapped, waiting, someone started making art. Because that's what humans do when the world forces them to be still.